At almost midnight on July 7, 2017, an Airbus 320-200 was in the home stretch of a regular 5-hour flight from Toronto to San Francisco. Upon initiating the descent, the Air Canada flight's crew was instructed to execute a quiet bridge maneuver to overfly the bay's main bridges and land on runway 28R instead of the usual 28L, which was undergoing construction work. However, as the airplane was cleared to land, footage captured on a CCTV video shows that the Airbus headed straight for the taxiway instead of descending into the runway. Astonishingly, as the commercial plane continued its ominous landing path toward 4 fully loaded and crowded airplanes waiting for takeoff, neither the crew nor the control tower noticed the imminent disaster. Then a voice from one of the planes below forewarned over the radio, quote, "Where's this guy going? He's on the taxiway." Heading for disaster. Air Canada Flight 759 was a regular trip connecting Toronto to San Francisco on an Airbus 320-200. On July 7, 2017, the airliner took off with 135 passengers and 5 crew members ready for an uneventful journey. The 56-year-old captain had more than 20,000 hours of flight, of which roughly 1/4 were on the A320. Meanwhile, the 42-year-old first officer had over 10,000 flight hours and at least 2,400 on the airplane in question. Their names, however, were never disclosed. At the beginning of the trip, the crew was updated through a notice to airmen, or NOTAM, about an important update. That night, from 11 p.m. to 8 a.m., runway 28L of the San Francisco International Airport would be closed for repair, as workers were installing new lighting and resurfacing the runway. The 5-hour flight was expected to arrive in San Francisco at 11:03 p.m. Pacific Time. Still, it was delayed at the Toronto Pearson International Airport due to poor weather conditions, and it took off half an hour later than scheduled at 9:58 p.m. local time. While the first officer didn't recall seeing the warning, the captain did. However, not yet aware of the 30-minute delay, he expected to arrive before the closure, perhaps cutting 3 minutes from the original arrival time. Still, halfway through the flight, both officers briefly discussed the closure, but they didn't recall it by the time they approached their destination. As the plane neared San Francisco past 11:30 p.m., the closed runway was in total obscurity, except for a large flashing white X at the threshold and a few scattered construction vehicles. The airport's air traffic controller then instructed the airplane to execute a quiet bridge approach and go over several major bridges in the Bay Area. The crew would then have to line up with runway 28R. The approved runway was parallel to the closed 28L, but a few hundred feet to the right was taxiway C, where 4 departing airplanes with over 1,000 people on board were waiting for permission to take off. Notably, the lights on 28R were considerably brighter than those on the taxiway, which was also narrower than the airstrip. However, both men completely forgot that 28L was closed, and in fact unlit. As they were given clearance to land, CCTV footage shows how the Airbus dropped as low as 175 feet, passing just above the airplanes in the taxiway and almost causing a worse tragedy than the Tenerife disaster of 1977, where 2 Boeing 747s collided. Chain of events. Shortly before midnight, one of 2 air traffic controllers decided to take a break, leaving his coworker alone to manage air and ground traffic in and around the airport. Then, at 11:46 p.m., the controller cleared Flight 759 to land. At that moment, the captain felt that something was off and asked his first officer to clarify with the controller. The first officer then radioed, quote, "Tower, I just want to confirm, this is Air Canada 759. We see some lights on the runway there across the runway. Can you confirm we're cleared to land?" As the air traffic controller saw no obstacles while looking at his instruments, he confirmed the clearance. The available footage shows the exact moment the Airbus pilots and the controller on land realized the imminent catastrophe. Fortunately, the United Airlines Boeing 787 Dreamliner pilot waiting at the top of the line had a clear view of the Airbus, but assumed the aircraft would realign with the runway. However, as he realized the incoming airplane was not changing course, he shouted into the microphone to draw attention to it. Philippine Airlines Flight 115 then turned on its bright landing lights to alert the Canadians, and suddenly, at a mere 84 feet above the ground, the Airbus pilots called for a go-around and stopped the descent. The Airbus had dropped to an estimated 65 feet by then, almost clipping the Philippine airplane's fin. By the time the controller ordered a missed approach 4 seconds later, the A320 was already climbing. Contributing factors. The previous night, the Airbus captain had slept at home in Toronto. He had just finished a trip from New York and went to sleep between 2 and 3 a.m. He then woke up by 7:45 a.m., merely 5 or 6 hours later. Initially, the pilot didn't have flight scheduled for that day, but was called up as a backup for Flight 759. When he reported for duty at 7:40 p.m., he had been awake for roughly 12 hours. Likewise, the first officer had gotten no more than 6 hours of sleep the previous 2 nights, and despite his 60 to 90-minute naps in the afternoon, the pace was taking a toll on his body and mind. Incidentally, while neither had any major training issues, the first officer had failed a promotion to captain on the account that he occasionally lost situational awareness, thus not performing to Transport Canada's standards. In addition to the severe fatigue, or because of it, both pilots missed a vital step when they carried out the quiet bridge approach. Although the approach was visual and flown manually with the aid of landmarks, the protocol required that the navigational equipment be tuned to the frequency of the Instrument Landing System, or ILS, to help in the alignment, even if the instrumentation itself was not to be used. However, the first officer did not enter the frequency, and the captain never confirmed to have seen it appear on the displays. Unable to explain why this confusion happened, it is believed that both officers were exhausted and incapable of correctly processing the charts. And to make matters worse, the maneuver was the only approach flown by Air Canada that required the ILS frequency to be tuned manually. The National Transportation Safety Board eventually revealed several holes in Canada's pilot fatigue rules. For all their joint experience, it was 3 a.m. when the plane was landing with not well-rested pilots, which severely hampered their ability to carry out otherwise standard maneuvers. After the report criticized the lax rules that didn't prevent the captain from flying despite his lack of sleep, Transport Canada changed its practices to better comply with international standards. Furthermore, in response to the close call, the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, banned all visual night approaches to the San Francisco International Airport when the parallel runway is closed. And of course, it is absolutely required that both controllers must be in the tower to handle late-night flights. The chain of events that night could have resulted in the worst air disaster in history. Thanks for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to all our Dark Documentaries channels for more uncanny events from the world's skies, oceans, and lands. Stay tuned.